I was happily settled in life, or so I thought. At 37, I had married into a wealthy family and was living comfortably with my husband, Mason. We sat together in the hotel lobby, the ambient noise of conversations and clinking glasses around us failing to break the tension between us. Mason's voice cut through the calm, sharp and taunting as he spoke. He reveled in his latest triumph, boasting about his new wife, the daughter of the president of Goldsmith Enterprises. His laughter, laced with pride, echoed in the room, but it was the mention of Goldsmith Enterprises that made my pulse quicken. The name immediately struck a chord. I knew I had heard it before, but it took a moment for the connection to register. As Mason continued, oblivious to my shifting focus, the pieces finally fell into place. Goldsmith Enterprises, my father's competitor in the real estate business. The name rang with significance in our industry, and I was keenly aware of their growing influence. I remained outwardly composed, but internally, a swirl of emotions stirred. Mason's boasting seemed almost trivial in light of this realization, yet he continued to gloat, basking in his own self-importance. He never paused to consider how his words might affect me. I, Patricia, was the only child of a powerful family, and my father was the president of a well-established real estate firm. My role in the company was modest, mostly administrative work, overseeing day-to-day operations, but I was being groomed to take over the reins when my father retired. As the future leader of the company, I had a weighty responsibility ahead, but I managed to balance my professional obligations with my personal life, always keeping the two spheres separate. That balance was key, especially when it came to Mason. Mason, in contrast, had a different path. He had completed high school and worked tirelessly for a moving company, a job I respected for its demands and physical toll. But to avoid making him feel insecure about my career and the potential future I had in the family business, I rarely spoke of my ambitions or the degrees I had earned. I never mentioned my work at my father's side or the leadership lessons I was learning. I knew it would only fuel his simmering insecurities. We had met in college through a mutual friend whose move had been handled by Mason's company. At first, Mason had his sights set on her, but when she rejected him, we found ourselves spending time together. His easygoing personality was a refreshing contrast to my more meticulous nature. Our connection grew, and what started as a brief friendship evolved into something more. We married in our late 20s, after a brief but intense courtship. The years following our wedding were largely uneventful, and our life together seemed picture-perfect. Our bond was strengthened by the warm relationship I had with Mason's parents, an unusual, welcome dynamic that most of my friends envied. Despite his long hours at work, which often left him exhausted, Mason remained committed to our marriage. Even after particularly grueling days, he would thank me for waiting up to share dinner, expressing gratitude in a way that always made me feel cherished. I was lucky, I thought, to have such a devoted husband. But after a year of marriage, things began to change. One night, as we settled into bed, Mason unexpectedly brought up the subject of starting a family. The tension in his voice caught me off guard. I had thought about children, of course, but I hadn't felt any urgency. We hadn't actively tried yet, but I assumed that, in time, it would happen naturally. "It's only been a year," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "There's no need to rush." I wanted children, of course, but the way Mason broached the subject felt wrong. His insistence only added pressure. He countered with statistics, quoting a figure I hadn't heard before. There's about a 90% chance of conceiving within a year for couples not using contraception." I was taken aback. "If you're really concerned, maybe we should both get tested," I suggested, trying to remain calm and approach the matter logically. His response was sharp and unexpected. "What are you implying? That it's my fault?" His voice dripped with disdain, and it was the first time I had ever heard such a tone from him. I was stunned. I hadn't accused him of anything. I simply wanted to take a joint approach to any potential fertility issues. But Mason, somehow convinced I was blaming him, snapped back. "It's usually the woman's fault anyway," he added bitterly, as though trying to turn the blame on me. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. "I didn't mean it like that," I managed, though my voice wavered. He was already dismissing my response. "Well, if you're so worried about it, you get tested," he muttered. I bit my lip, holding back my frustration. "I'm not the only one working here, Mason. I have a job too. You don't get to act like I'm just coasting along in my father's company." His words stung. It wasn't true, and I knew it. Yes, my role was more administrative, but I was learning the ropes. actively preparing for the future leadership of the business. His dismissal of my efforts felt like an insult. That night, the argument went unresolved. We fell asleep in silence, our backs turned to one another, the unspoken tension between us hanging heavy in the air. What had once been a peaceful life now felt fragile, teetering on the edge of something much more complicated. I had become my father. The realization hit me slowly, like the steady drip of water eroding a stone. I was a mirror image of the man I had spent my life admiring, even fearing at times, a quiet authority, a steady presence, calm, controlled, always keeping things in balance. At 37, I found myself in a position I hadn't fully anticipated. My father, concerned about my well-being, had suggested, "Maybe you should take a break. Why don't you take a trip? It's going to get busy starting next month." I appreciated the concern and, feeling mentally drained from the relentless pace of my life, I decided it was time for a change of scenery. I needed something to refresh my spirit, a retreat from the weight of responsibility. So, I booked a solo trip to the Northeast, craving solitude and the clarity that comes with distance. The air was crisp and refreshing, and the landscape around me seemed to cleanse my weary soul. I interacted with the locals, who were warm and welcoming, and each passing day mended me a little more. After a few days, I decided to continue my escape by treating myself to a stay in Los Angeles. I booked a room at a renowned hotel, seeking luxury and comfort. Upon checking in, I relaxed in the grand hotel lobby, sipping a welcome drink. The exhaustion from my journey seemed to melt away as I took in the elegance of the surroundings. I felt at peace, almost giddy with the relief of being far from home. I even half-joked to myself about possibly moving to Los Angeles for good, imagining a fresh start. That was when I heard the voice. Hey, what are you doing here?" I turned, startled, to see none other than Mason walking through the lobby. I hadn't expected to run into him, and certainly not in a place like this. As if the universe had a twisted sense of humor. He wasn't alone. He was carrying 2 large suitcases, and at his side was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She was striking, her flawless skin and bold makeup drawing attention, her bright red nails standing out against the cool tone of the northeast weather. Her attire was similarly out of place, a short skirt, despite the chilly temperatures. My gaze locked onto them in disbelief, trying to process what I was seeing. "Why are you here, and who is she?" I blurted out, the words slipping from my mouth before I could stop them. Mason flashed a grin, his eyes lighting up with a self-satisfied gleam. "Oh, let me introduce you," he said, his voice laced with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "This is Diana, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon, and guess what? She's the daughter of a wealthy businessman." The name, Diana, hit me like a physical blow. I recognized it immediately. It was the same Diana from the phone call months ago. The same woman he had spoken about with such pride. I felt a strange knot in my stomach, a mixture of discomfort and something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the youth of his new wife that bothered me, it was the way he reveled in it, so openly proud of marrying someone so much younger, someone so well-connected. "You're here alone? That's sad," Mason sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Diana, standing beside him, eyed me with a smirk that seemed to match his tone. "Hey, Mason. Is this your ex-wife? She looks old. Hurry up with the check-in," she said, her words sharp and dismissive, clearly not interested in pleasantries. I swallowed my irritation, maintaining my composure. I had come here to find peace, not to engage in a petty confrontation. But Mason, ever the show-off, didn't let it go. He draped an arm around Diana's shoulders, as if to underline his triumph, and boasted, "Yeah, I'm set for life now. I married into money. You keep struggling in your modest life, Patricia." His laugh rang out, high-pitched and harsh, cutting through the peaceful atmosphere of the lobby. I could feel the weight of his words, his need to belittle me so completely. "Yeah, Diana is Goldsmith's daughter," he added, puffing out his chest. "Goldsmith Enterprises, you know the name?" I froze. Goldsmith Enterprises, the name echoed in my mind, and for a brief moment, everything around me seemed to pause. "Impressive, huh? Her family's loaded. They even paid off our house mortgage quickly. Thanks for making the divorce easy, Patricia," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to react. "Yeah, I know them. They're in that big building downtown, right? I've been there," I replied calmly, not giving away the growing storm inside me. Mason's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Oh, You've been there? Well, her family owns a huge company, so breaking up with you was the right choice," he added, his smirk turning malicious. I nodded slowly, my voice steady. "That building? It's part of our real estate holdings," I said nonchalantly, as if discussing the weather. Both Mason and Diana looked at me in confusion. "What do you mean, our real estate?" they asked in unison, clearly not understanding. I paused for a moment, watching their skepticism, then, with a quiet sense of finality, I added, "That building is rented by my father for his most prestigious office. I'm not sure if your company is involved in real estate, but it's certainly not a shabby building." Mason's expression flickered with disbelief. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, and I knew this was going to sting. I allowed the silence to stretch between us before continuing. "Yes, I know how grand it is. I was there when my father purchased that building for about $500 million. Recently, he was complaining about a tenant not paying their rent. Turns out, it was your company. In fact, my father is a real estate magnate with assets worth $5 billion, and that building is one of them. Goldsmith Enterprises has been the tenant for the past few months, and they hadn't paid their rent." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Mason's face turned red, and I could see the shock in his eyes. Diana, too, looked taken aback, her smirk faltering as the weight of my words settled in. I could feel the satisfaction of finally speaking my truth, of standing tall in this moment, but it wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my peace, about confronting the reality of the life I'd left behind, and the one I was still building, step by step,